Okay.
Right? You know the fuel pumps on Delmags, right?
Right.
It's got a pump lever.
Yeah.
Invented in 1936 by Delmag, and everybody's copied it. But these Japanese guys are like, we don't want that thing to pump fuel on soft soil, because when you try to start a Delmag on soft soil,
Don't work.
it comes down and there's barely any compression, so you put that fuel in the combustion chamber, right? But it didn't burn.
Right.
Right. Now
Yeah.
you drop it again and again. Now that thing's completely loaded up with fuel, right?
Yeah.
That's the way it is today.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
But these Japanese guys are like, how can you come up with a fuel pump that won't pump fuel like that until we have resistance? So we're not choking the fucking thing. You know what I mean by choking?
Yeah.
Choking an engine is when you have way too much fuel and no ignition.
Right.
Which is so they took the lever away and put a air pressure piston. So when the ram comes down, if there's no fucking pressure, it won't pump. Right?
Yeah.
It comes down, but air pushes the pump, not a lever.
Okay.
Be like a squirt gun,
Yeah.
but instead of your finger squirting it, air is pushing it.
Okay.
Follow me?
Yeah.
So in that mode, Ishikawa, these two engineers, figured out how to make the hammer not... Because, once those things fire up, Delmag, they're smoky as hell because they're trying to burn all the fuel that didn't burn when they were tripping it.
Right. Yeah.
So when I saw this guy, Joe Yip, post about it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell him the history. So these two Japanese guys who worked for Ishikawa, they got a patent, right?
Yeah.
And that was the first diesel hammer patent that wasn't Delmag. The Delmag patented their atomization at impact pumps, and they had this great knowledge that they didn't want that fuel to ignite until right when the piston hit the anvil.
Right.
That was called atomization at impact.
Okay.
And they had a patent on it.
Right.
So now these guys had their own patent, right?
Okay.
And they introduced Ishikawa into the USA in 1976.
Okay.
And somehow Pinto ended up with them. So I started working on Ishikawa's, and that's where I saw this air pressurized fuel pump.
Oh.
So then, in the 70s and 80s, Birmingham introduces and claims that they're the inventor of it, right?
Oh, no shit.
And I go to them and I go, you didn't invent that. And then ICE copied it.
Oh.
So you had Birminghamers and ICE building diesel hammers with an air-actuated fuel pump, right?
I see.
So I told Pat Birmingham, I said, you copied that from Ishikawa. And he goes, you know about Ishikawa? So I flew up to their factory in Hamilton, Ontario. And I go out in their yard, and they got a half a dozen fucking Ishikawas. And I go, you stole these two guys' invention. So, Pat was humble and said, yeah, we didn't invent it. Ishikawa did. But he said Ishikawa, combined with that, went with a much higher pressure fuel spray.
Yeah.
And what happened is the ram would come down and the fuel would ignite and send the ram up before it even hit the anvil.
Oh, wow.
So if you were standing there watching a Delmag and an Ishikawa run, you're measuring the stroke, right?
Right.
Fucking Delmag would just drive the pile and the Ishikawa would sit there with the same stroke, but the pile wouldn't go anywhere
What?
because the fuel was, diesel fuel, when you compress it, it explodes, right?
Yeah.
You don't have spark plugs.
Right.
What these two engineers were trying to do is inject a fine spray that would not smoke,
Yeah.
right? But when they made that fine spray, they didn't realize that it was so
Light.
light that when they dropped the ram, even before the ram hit the anvil, it would explode.
Oh, shit.
So Ishikawa,
No reaction.
okay, so how did I know that? Let me tell you what happened. The West Seattle Bridge, that was built in 1983, right? So Domag put a hammer there.
Yeah.
And here comes Ishikawa, Mitsubishi with their high pressure fuel injection. Without understanding that Domag did not have high pressure. In fact, even today, your Domag, it's spraying like if you filled your mouth full of diesel fuel and squirted it out your teeth at 30 psi.
Oh, wow.
It just kind of comes out in a droplets that aren't going to ignite until you compress them, right?
Right.
And these Germans want to have that so that it doesn't ignite until it hits right at atomization at impact.
Yeah.
So I'm at West Seattle. I got two hammers, a Domag P100, and it wasn't an Ishikawa, but it was Japanese. It was Mitsubishi. It was a Kobe. So all
Kobe.
of the Japanese hammers, the three Japanese diesel hammers, Ishikawa, Kobe, and Mitsubishi, tried this high pressure injection stuff.
Yeah.
And they claimed, oh, our hammer runs clean and it starts really easy. So they're on the job,
Jesus.
and the hammers won't take the pile down, but the Domag's driving them to grave, right? What the hell's going on here? That's when I learned from Dr. George Goebel, who came out from GRL and said, I'm going to put my instruments on it. And he did, and he came to me and he said, yeah, they're stroking 10 feet, but the stroke is all lost from the ignition of the fuel, so it would just come down and poof, no smoke, and it ran clean, and it was impressive to watch.
That's some
But
shit.
it wouldn't drive a pile. Right?
Fuck.
And there went, once
Out.
George Goebel said that, they were out. Just like, George Goebel is the discoverer of the Vulcan air hammer not delivering its full energy. Vulcan used to dominate the pile driving business with their air steam hammers.
Yeah.
But when George put the sensors on the pile,
Yeah.
he noticed that it was only delivering about 40% of its rated energy.
Wow.
And it's like,
40.
what the fuck?
That sucks.
Why is this fucking this air hammer only delivering 40%? What he found out was Vulcan was putting air into the cylinder before it even hit to get more stroke per minute.
Oh.
So they had 60 blows a minute, but
Yeah.
because they were putting the air into the cylinder to raise the
countering
ram, air steam,
the
they were
energy.
only getting about 40% because the ram couldn't hit the pile
At full
at full
speed.
gravity drop.
At full gravity
it was
drop.
being dampened by, because
air.
what the problem was with Vulcan air and steam hammers is air is very compressible. We can take all this air that we're looking at and breathing right now and compress it into a bottle, right? We can compress it until it becomes a liquid.
Oh, wow.
Whereas hydraulic oil is not compressible. That's why the hydraulic hammer is way more efficient, because they don't have to send oil to raise the ram until the ram hits.
Okay.
Because immediately after it hits, they can put oil in there and there's no compression, so the ram goes up very quickly.
Right.
If you tried to do that with air,
Oof, take forever.
the air compresses and it'd take forever for the ram to come.
Right.
So George basically with his instrument rendered it. That's what killed the air steam hammer for driven bearing piles.
Right.
You know.
But they work well for the offshore though, right? Like the offshore people love those hammers, the Balkan.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know why, but
I think
they love those hammers.
the offshore. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that they lost popularity when George discovered, and then he also, of course, discovered that the diesel hammer only delivers about that same amount because when the ram comes down on a Delmag, they're injecting the fuel in the air from the exhaust ports, intake exhaust ports, and that fuel, even though they say atomization at impact, it actually fires a millisecond before the ram hits the anvil. And so diesel hammers are not 100% efficient. The only thing that you can get efficiently is even a drop hammer. When you pick a drop hammer up and drop it, normally your energy is weight times height, but you have to subtract for the shears, the cables that are holding on to the drop hammer. They have to spool off of a crane drum.
Oh.
So you lose 20%. For example, if you take a 10,000-pound hammer and you pick it up 3 feet, that's 30,000 foot-pounds.
Right.
If you put George's sensors on it, it won't be 3,000 foot-pounds. It'll be 20% less than that.
It won't be 30,000 foot-pounds.
No, it won't.
Okay.
Because 20% of it was lost trying to spool the cable out. Now, if you cut the cable and just dropped it without any resistance, you would still have resistance because the drop hammer has to slide in those leaders.
Yeah.
And the guides have friction.
They have friction, they'll slow it down a little bit.
And you know who knew that a long time ago was the Romans.
Okay.
The Romans, if you look at their writing, they found out a long time ago if you drop something from more than 8 feet, then you can't transfer the energy into the pile effectively because there'll be rebound. So the Romans wrote a spec saying, all right, if you drop from more than 8 feet to drive this pile, we're going to deduct whatever it bounces off of the energy. So if you drop it from 10 feet and the ram bounced up 2 feet, they would only give you credit for 8 feet.
Okay, interesting. Wow. Well, that's cool. So the ones that are the most efficient definitely are the hydraulic hammers.
Yeah, but there's a problem that George and I discovered before he died. Well, actually, it was not George, but one of his disciples, Bert Miner. We were on the Mariners Stadium.
Let's go through here. Let's go go there and then there.
Yeah. And we had a Yunton hydraulic hammer, and we were trying to beat the Delmag. But remember, a Delmag will stroke 10 feet, 11 feet, you know?
Right.
So, this hydraulic hammer, yes, it's efficient for raising the ram with hydraulic oil, and we could drop it. And Yunton, to make up for those losses I just talked about, they were dumping oil on the top of the cylinder and slightly accelerating the ram down to get 100% efficiency.
Oh, wow.
But because engineers knew about this efficiency deal, Yunton wisely only accelerated enough to get to 95% efficient, which you would never get just raising the ram and dropping it hydraulically.
Right.
But they were accelerating. And if you notice their literature, it'll say Yunton, HHK9A. But the A is a little tiny A that you hardly see, right? And they don't really say on their British what that means on their literature, right? But that means assisted. The ram is assisted downward.
Assisted downward.
But, you know, with these finicky engineers, they were trying to accelerate too fast in the beginning, and the ram would be delivering 120%. And the engineer would go, wait a minute now, we're dropping from 1 meter. How in the hell is this hammer delivering more than the gravity drop? And then they'd have to explain it. And then the engineer would say, well, how do we know what your acceleration is? We don't want that. We just want gravity drop.
Yeah.
So they dialed it back to where it was assisting, but not enough to alert the engineers. So now the engineers are like, wow, this hammer's really efficient. So
That's how they did
that
it.
kept the engineers from lobbying against them on, because, you know, the IHC Dutch hammer accelerates the ram down with nitrogen gas at 2G, right?
Yeah.
Well, no engineer wants to deal with that because you don't know if it accelerated down at 2Gs or not, because it's being accelerated by the expansion of nitrogen gas. I don't know if you knew that nitrogen gas is what's in automobile shocks or your screen door. You got that screen door to slow the screen door.
Yeah.
That's squeezing that nitrogen gas.
Oh.
Now, nitrogen gas, why did they pick nitrogen gas to accelerate the ram down? It's because you can squeeze and expand nitrogen gas all day long and it doesn't get hot. Like if you squeeze air back and forth, it'll get hot.
Yeah.
If you squeeze, you know, other gases, they'll get hot. But this nitrogen gas, that's why they're in automobiles, to keep you from bouncing off the road.
Cool.
Well, you see that application. But that's all done with an accumulator.
That's
So
what they use in the
ram-
hammers.
The ram comes up, it squeezes nitrogen gas into an accumulator,
Yeah.
and then when it trips, the gas expands and expands the ram down, accelerates the ram down by 2Gs.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Which is great if you're on batter piles where you're going to lose energy from gravity drop.
Yeah.
But it's an engineering nightmare, because what if the nitrogen isn't there?
Yeah.
Or it bled off? Your
Oh.
accumulators
Yeesh.
went empty,
Oof.
which is a common occurrence with these hydraulic hammers.
Yeah.
But back to your question about diesel hammer efficiency versus hydraulic hammer efficiency.
Yes.
You know, you got IHC that's accelerating down with nitrogen gas.
Yeah.
You got Yunton doing the same, but with hydraulic oil, but not enough to alert people.
Yeah.
And then you got the other big hydraulic hammer manufacturer is Mink
Mink.
out of Germany. They accelerate the ram down with hydraulic oil, but they don't give a shit about the engineers,
Okay.
because their wheelhouse is offshore.
Offshore.
And offshore, they just want tech, right?
Yeah.
They're smart enough to figure out, because they put the sensors on the pile, and they just want to get the pile in the ground before tides change and weather changes. Right?
Yeah.
So Mink has this offshore dominance that's different than driving a bearing pile where an engineer signs off and he wants to know what the energy is, because he's signing for life when he
Right.
signs the foundation.
Okay.
So anyway, back to the hydraulic hammer.
Yeah.
The problem is you can't lift it from too high,
Okay.
right? So hydraulic hammers don't lift the ram up as high as a diesel hammer. Like a diesel hammer can go 11 feet.
Yeah.
Hydraulic hammer can only go, well, some of them are pushing up to 5 feet now. And
Why
5
is
foot
that?
stroke. Well, the hydraulic cylinder, if you were to take one and lift the ram 11 feet, that means you have 11 feet of hydraulic oil you got to get rid of
Ooh.
when the ram drops. 'Cause
Yeah.
when you raise the ram, you're raising it with hydraulic oil. Where's that oil going to go when you tell it to drop? So you got these fancy hydraulic cylinders that open and circulate the oil as fast as possible,
Oh, okay.
and some of it's going into what's called a low pressure accumulator, because that oil's flying. It cannot go back down the return line that fast, or it'll
okay.
just jerk the hoses.
Okay.
So there's an accumulator that oil goes to temporarily, and then
That
spools
extra-
out the return line below, turbulent speed, right? Because if you send oil through a hydraulic hose too fast, it will implode. The molecules will implode. It's kind of like a cavitation in that these little bubbles will pop on the inside of the hoses, and they're like little explosions.
Oh wow.
So you can't accelerate oil too fast down a hydraulic hose. Now you can get a big fucking giant hydraulic hose, but you can't get one big enough to get rid of all that oil. Plus, when the oil goes down that return line, then where does it go?
Wow.
Part of it's going through the oil cooler. You don't want to blow your oil cooler.
Whew.
You don't want to blow your filters.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's
a lot
why
goes
on the
there.
Antius machine, we don't even have a cooler or filter on our return line. We have a separate kidney loop for the oil to go through the oil cooler and the filters. And we don't try to control that oil returning from the hammer.
Okay.
And then we have that kidney loop filters the oil 3 times. It filters the entire tank every 3 minutes.
Oh wow.
So our oil is clean, and we don't blow oil coolers. But
And you
anyway,
have accumulators on him? You have accumulators on that?
No, there's no accumulators on the
Okay.
power pack. But
Okay.
on the hydraulic hammer, there's these high pressure accumulators and low pressure accumulators.
And that gives it the extra push down, or
Well, okay, so
like the Junton?
the problem with hydraulic hammers is the same problem that Vulcan had. We want to drive 60 blows a minute. Okay, so Vulcan and the air guys were putting air into the lifting cylinder before it hit.
Yeah.
Now, with a hydraulic hammer, you don't have, air is only limited to maybe 125 psi, right? Hydraulic hammers, you can go 4,000 to 5,000 psi, so you don't need a lot of oil, right, to lift the ram.
Yeah.
But you kind of do when you're lifting the ram, because lifting the ram takes time.
Yeah.
And you cannot get all of that oil from the power pack to lift the ram fast enough, because you got the pumps pumping, but if you wait on the pumps, the engine will bog, and so what really happens is the power pack sends oil to a high pressure accumulator, and when you tell the ram to go up, it's not going up from the hydraulic power unit oil, it's going up from the oil stored in that accumulator. It's like a capacitor. So and that's one of the things that people don't understand about hydraulic hammers. You can start one up, start the power unit up, you're not even running the hydraulic hammer, and then you can shut it off, shut the engine off, and hit the button to stroke. That ram should go up one time, just from the oil in the accumulator.
I see.
And that's how you test whether or not your accumulator is charged.
Okay.
And if you watch hydraulic hammers, when they lose that pressure in the accumulator, the ram is kind of coming up slow, and then the pumps are raising it. And you're like, what's wrong with this hydraulic hammer? The ram is kind of coming up, and then it slows down, and then it comes up a little bit more. And it's not raising from the accumulated oil in the accumulator. It's being raised from the oil in the power pack. And so when the ram goes up with the accumulated oil, then you have to drop it, right?
Yeah.
So the oil's got to get out of the way, so that oil goes into a low pressure accumulator that is then metered out of the return line in a civil way. But all the time that ram is dropping, the power unit is charging the accumulator for the next stroke.
I see.
That's the brilliance of hydraulic hammers, and the fact that oil is not compressible, right? So you can do all of those things and make a hydraulic hammer very efficient. Even a hammer that's not accelerated down is 80% efficient.
80%.
But the problem is, you can't, like the Romans figured out, once you get to a certain drop height, you lose efficiency. And if you tried to raise it up 11 feet like a
Like a
diesel,
diesel.
your blow count would be so slow because it takes
Oof.
time to raise up 11 feet.
Right.
And not only that, now you got 11 feet of hydraulic oil to get out of the way.
Right.
So you'd have to have a monstrous low pressure accumulator,
Oof.
and you'd have to have a monstrous high pressure accumulator, because the higher the ram raises, the more oil you need to raise the ram.
For sure. Makes sense. Well, wow. There you have it, folks.
I hope you comprehend that, but that's a lot.
There you have it, folks. That was the history of the diesel and hydraulic impact hammers by John White at the Puget Sound Bay with Frankie. Hey, let's go up that hill.